Sustainable fashion, upcycled denim quilts, lab-grown meat, and electronic music. I think those four terms, this is the first time those four terms came together in a sentence here at the Museum of Science. But we are really all about innovation in thinking, innovation in science, innovation in creativity. I want to present to you tonight the possibility that science and art can collaborate together to give us hope for the future in addressing probably the greatest challenge of our times now. So without any further ado, I would like to call my panelists up to the stage, and I'll do the introductions. First up is Jennifer Varekamp, who is professor and chair of the Fashion Design Department at Massachusetts College of Art and Design, MassArt. With an unwavering commitment to sustainability, Jen has been teaching sustainable fashion for well over a decade now. She has been involved in conferences, summits, and field work in different parts of the world. For example, she was a guest presenter at the Sustainable Fashion Summit at the Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week in Sri Lanka. All these experiences have given Jen a deeper understanding of the complexities of fashion and sustainability. Our next panelist is Leneigh White. Leneigh is the co-president of the Boston Modern Quilt Guild, an organization devoted to elevating the art of quilting, as well as engaging with the community in various ways, including creating quilts for education as well as charity. Next, we have Meera Zassenhaus. Meera leads communications and public affairs at the Tufts University Center for Cellular Agriculture, which is an interdisciplinary academic center with over 100 researchers working on cultivated meat. Meera works to communicate what's happening in the lab to policymakers, journalists, future consumers, early adopters, and skeptics, with the goal of maximizing transparency about this emerging technology. And last, we have Scooby Lepowski. Scooby is a Cambridge-based sound engineer and designer, and artist, who focuses on the act of listening for most of his career, and he has created film scores for numerous documentaries, sound signatures for consumer robots, and crafted dance floor anthems for clubs around the world. And he'll be DJing tonight, folks. Yes. He now spends his time finding ways to listen to, document, and showcase nature's hidden activities in the hope that humans will be compelled to learn from and preserve the non-human world. So thank you, all four of you, for joining me here today. I'm going to give each of you an opportunity just to give us some background information about your area of interest. And we'll start with Jennifer. Why don't you go ahead? Here's a clicker for you.
Good evening, everyone. As an educator of sustainable fashion, I thought that it's important to raise awareness, and we do that by sharing information and facts. So we're all wearing clothing tonight, so I think to some degree we're all consumers. In 2014, Americans threw away more than 16 million tons of clothing. That was 71% more than they threw away in 2000, so in 14 years. At that same time, during the rise of fast fashion, garment production doubled, and garments purchased rose by 60%. So all of a sudden, we were in a take, make, and dispose mentality, which is really dangerous when you look at those statistics. And at this point, catastrophic. So as designers, it's incredibly important that we look at the waste that's already there and figure out ways to use it, and also figure out ways not to create more waste by using biodegradable materials or zero waste pattern making. And also another huge issue with the industry is pollution, and one part of that is water pollution. 20% of the industrial water pollution in the world, it comes from garment manufacturing, and that could be from dyeing facilities, so dye houses around the world, or denim manufacturing, or leather tanneries. Garment workers are among the lowest paid workers in the world. And 75 million people work in the garment and textile industry. and 75% of them are women. Another issue is the scale and the speed of production. It used to be, before fast fashion, that there were 2 collections a year. And now some retailers like Zara produce up to 22 collections a year. So the speed is uncontrollable and the volume is really intense. So as consumers, it's really important, because we're all sitting here to some degree as consumers, to think about the choices that you're making. Think about why you're purchasing something, and when you are purchasing something, thinking about where did that garment, where was it made, how are the textiles, are they sustainable, who is it that you're purchasing, your designer, the brand, the company, how much do you know about their sustainable processes and designs. A little bit about my own entry into this. I've spent many years, decades, learning from and working with artisans, working with traditional techniques in textile design and apparel design from different parts of the world, many of these indigenous groups. And from my experience over time, one thing I've noticed is that the fashion industry, and particularly fast fashion, has had a deep impact on them as well, as some of these traditional techniques are disappearing, and with that, a part of one's own cultural identity and cultural heritage. So how do we help preserve this? How do we stop that so that these skills and knowledge are continuing to be passed down? One thing that I've been doing in an education perspective is that I run 2 travel courses that's focused on sustainable handcrafts and working with social enterprises in Laos and in India. And in India, we actually have been able to bring students to visit organic cotton farms, because for me, it's about getting students to understand the source of their materials and being able to connect with the farmers themselves. So this part is incredibly important in terms of sustainability. Many of these indigenous groups have been living sustainably since their existence, so there is so much to be learned in that regard. And then there's so much excitement. We're sitting here in the Museum of Science, and for me, like when we think about sustainability, there's no place I'd rather honestly be doing a fashion show, because I feel this is the future of where fashion, sustainable solutions lie right now, are with science and designers and engineers working together. And I'm just highlighting a few. There's many brands and companies emerging, but there's fibers and fabrics being made from this algae and seaweed. MycoWorks is a biotech company that's creating an alternative leather. They have a full-scale functioning production now in North Carolina that's making it from mycelium, from the mycelium of mushrooms. Spiber is a Japanese materials company that's using a fermentation process to produce fibers instead of petrochemicals. So when I look at this, I think science will be at the future and is leading the future of design.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was terrific. And really look forward to engaging in conversation with all the panelists and with you on this topic. Leneigh, can you give us some background about your work?
Sure. First of all, thank you for that. I feel like we all have so much that we could learn from you. So I want to talk tonight specifically about a project the Boston Modern Quilt Guild completed that you'll be enjoying upstairs. But I thought I'd start off by asking just a simple raise of hands. How many of you have now or have ever owned a pair of jeans? How about a denim jacket, a denim shirt, dress, cap, etc., etc.? We love our denim. It is part of our American culture. It is a worldwide phenomenon. We love our denim. Maybe not everybody, but some of us find our denim jeans don't fit forever. Maybe one more hole than is fashionable. Maybe they got too short. And so what happens to them? Where do they all go? Unfortunately, every year globally, a massive 2.16 million metric tons, that's just more than I can imagine, of just the denim jeans, not even the jeans and everything else, end up in a landfill. In fact, 85% of all textiles end up in landfills, which accounts for 11.3 million tons just in the US. So our former president, Cheryl Marshall, brought this to our guild and said, guys, what can we do? We use fibers, we use fabrics, what can we do? Well, the Boston Modern Quilt Guild, we always have the same answer. Let's quilt about it. That's what we did. But before I go into our specific project, quilting has a long and established history of being sustainable. Everybody needs a blanket. And yet not everybody has had access to materials and fabrics. There was often a price differential that mattered. And so grandma's scraps, flour sacks, all of these things became used when baby needed a quilt. And so it's a natural marriage between quilting and sustainability to continue to tap into our history. And that's a whole topic that we could take an entire course on, but I didn't want to fail to mention that. So let me talk about our project that you're going to see in our exhibit upstairs. We called this the Denim Project, and here's just a couple of the quilts that you're going to see upstairs. Each member was tasked to make a quilt where at least 50% of it was made out of denim, because that's what we wanted to discuss, but the rest had to also be upcycled. So you couldn't buy anything unless it was from a thrift store, and so you won't believe what you came up with. There's sheets, there's shirts, there's buttons, there's mirrors and pipes. There's all sorts of things, because we found as a guild when we were limited in what we could do, it actually opened up our creativity. And so as you go upstairs, look close. You can get close to these things and see what their makers use. And for us, what we want to really point out is just because something is old or soiled or stained, doesn't mean it's no longer useful. And together we could create something beautiful.
Thank you. Well, I'm just so impressed by the creativity and resourcefulness of quilters in general, but also of the Guild in this particular project. So Meera, we're going to shift gears now, because we've talked thus far about fabric arts, the fashion, about quilts, but there's also creativity scientifically of what's happening. And this is really kind of propelling us into the future, not simply drawing on the past. So tell us about the work that you're involved in.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to pivot and talk a little bit about food and the growing of foods like meat, milk, and eggs from cells instead of animals. And so we call this agricultural application of really traditional medical technologies cellular agriculture, or CellAg for short. And sort of the crown jewel of CellAg is cultivated or lab-grown meat. And that's what we're working on at Tufts, where we have about 100 researchers from the undergraduate to faculty level working on different aspects of cultivated meat. So the building blocks broken down are really cells, scaffolds, media, bioreactors, and we have researchers working across the spectrum there. So the reason that we're doing this is because industrial animal agriculture sucks. Factory farming is responsible for roughly like 15% of emissions globally. It's a highly efficient way to produce lots and lots of food, but that comes at a cost to the environment, but also animals, workers, and human health and safety more generally. As we're learning with the recent bird flu epidemic, when you crowd lots and lots of animals in tight spaces, that's a hotbed for zoonotic disease. And so we need some sort of alternative way to produce these large quantities of meat. But plant-based meat, if you've had an Impossible or Beyond Burger, doesn't really cut it. Like the meltiness of cheese and the ability of muscle fibers to hold together fat and water and things like sausages, that's something that a lot of people have been trying to reproduce with pea proteins and soy and nuts, but it always sort of falls flat, and that's because animal proteins and animal products have functionalities that are really hard to reproduce. You can just sort of approximate. So this is happening now. There are roughly 170 companies worldwide working on cultivated meat. And so last summer, a group of us went to California and were able to try a lot of these products. So fun fact is that I am a lifelong vegetarian. I've never actually had animal meat in my life, despite devoting my entire career and personal life to fake meat. These were my first bites of salmon, chicken, and beef, respectively, from companies called Wild Type, Good, and Sci-Fi Foods. I can't really comment on their fidelity to actual meat products because I was really accessing them as new food groups, but other people in the audience are here and can talk about how they compared to real meat. But I think it's often we talk about alt proteins and cultivated meat in sort of depressing conversations about how they serve as solutions to all of these problems of industrial animal agriculture. But what excites me, especially as a lifelong vegetarian that has no appetite really for meat in the first place, is sort of the culinary possibilities unlocked when you remove the constraint that is the animal's body. So you can think of, the kitchen was the original laboratory and fermentation was sort of the original biotechnology. So we used to have this substance that came from cows that was milk, and it was only through fermentation that we were able to get the entire dairy aisle. So stinky cheeses, blue cheeses, sour cream, yogurt. All of these new foods were things that we never could have imagined before fermentation. And so I think that cultivated meat sort of unlocks a lot of gastronomic possibilities because you can sort of fine-tune the nutritional profile. You're not limited by the types of species of animals that you can corral into tight quarters. You can make aardvark meat, or you can co-culture cannabinoids with beef cells. This was an art project made about in 2013, which was a cookbook, a bistro in vitro cookbook. So some examples of the types of meats that they were posturing would be enabled by this technology were celebrity cubes. So could we culture like your mother's cells or Lady Gaga's cells? What types of shapes and textures and flavors are we able to create now that we're not limited by animals? So that's what we're up to at Tufts, and we'll have a table upstairs with a lot of our scientists who can answer questions if you're curious.
I can guarantee that celebrity cues was never, ever uttered in this building. That's pretty astonishing. Thank you so much for that. Scooby, please tell us about your work.
So I've spent the last 25 years working in sound and music as a sound designer and composer. So really engaged in the act of listening, thinking about what you as an audience will hear when I collaborate with a director or even like a product designer. And I'm always looking for new tools in the studio, to create, generate new ideas. And I became aware of biodata sonification. And some of you may have seen that on like social media with people hooking up to mushrooms and making sounds. So I started working with biodata sonification, and it wasn't until I left the studio and started doing it out in nature that it really got interesting for me as an artist, and then those implications of like what is actually creating this music that I'm hearing and how these kind of vectors of human influence are really kind of filtered through the trees and these plants, and then ultimately it's what you end up hearing. So this first image is kind of the logo for an ongoing public art project I have called Hidden Live Radio, which is a live stream that plays 24 hours a day during the tree's leaf cycle. So starting roughly around the summertime and then ending when there are no leaves to connect to and sonify. So you can tune in each day, any moment, to hear what the tree's electrical activity is like. So this is one of the kits that's like solar powered, installed in the tree. It gets live streamed throughout the season. Here's another one. This is from last summer in upstate New York. Another project I have is called Palm Reading, and I'm working with a guitarist. And that's kind of a new age folk project where we go out into remote locations and do field recordings of the area, and then we're listening to everything in real time, and Charlie, the guitarist, is improvising based on what the flora is creating through the synth suite that's being created from the plant's activity. So we were going to different areas to try like what the different climates are and seeing if we can understand what these different conditions are, how they're affecting the music that's being created and what we're recording. This is on the top of the mountains near the Angeles Forest. Right after the wildfires, we had planned to go further into the forest, but the wildfires that happened several years ago prohibited us from going further into where we wanted to. So these climate conditions kind of affect, really influence our decisions, like where we end up and what we're able to connect to and record. The act of storytelling has always been a part of my process, and the idea now is can the story tell itself, through this technology, through biodata sonification, different embedded practices, where there's only enough of myself as an artist in the process, and really kind of give it over to for nature just to really kind of present itself for people to hear, and really kind of create a space for contemplation, for people to listen and wonder, what they're hearing and what's causing it. And these types of projects are the result of different partnerships with tree advocacy groups, to really draw attention to the urban canopy and places that lack trees. So these locations where we go are very significant to what people hear and what they don't hear as well.
Great, thank you. Well,
Yes.
I really look forward to hearing your music later this evening. I have just a general question for the panel, and any of you can answer this question. And also, I want the panelists to think about, are there any questions you want to pose to each other? But let me just start things off with this question. I really love events like this because it brings art and science together, and it brings people to the museum, maybe through the Arts Channel, who normally wouldn't have come here, or really, science is not top of mind for them. In each of your respective areas, how might somebody learn something, maybe indirectly, about science or engineering or math by relating to what you have to offer, what kind of work you're presenting tonight? Who would like to take that on? So how do you surreptitiously get a little bit of science, curiosity, knowledge through the arts and through food?
I can start. I think that at first, cultivated meat feels like this really sci-fi, outrageous thing. But like I said, really the kitchen was the original laboratory, and everything you're doing when you're preparing a meal, be it like microwaving a frozen Trader Joe's enchilada or like making egg pasta from scratch, involves science. And so we're doing and we're practicing science day to day. We're just not thinking about it that way.
I love how you put that cooking is also science. And in fact, if you ever worked in a laboratory, it's a lot like cooking. but that's great. Anybody else?
It might not be any surprise to the members of our guild, but quilting and science and math and engineering are intimately connected. In fact, in our guild, we have several engineers who are also quilting. It's math, it's putting things together, it's seeing the whole picture and understanding how things work, it's understanding dyeing, right? Some of our quilts up here have hand-dyed fabrics. So for us, it's always been a hand-to-hand concept.
A lot of people always ask, when they find out that the music's created by plant or tree activity, and it's always like on the website for Hidden Life Radio, there's explain what's causing the music, what's generating it, because people sometimes think it's acoustic, like that's actually what the tree sounds like, and I try to be as transparent. That's like actually there's code involved. It's reading the electrical activity as resistance, and that gets mapped through code to a musical scale that then people end up hearing. So I think for me, science is really integral to this type of work. It wouldn't exist otherwise to be generative and kind of running on its own in an autonomous way.
I would just say I completely agree with Leneigh in terms of fashion. Pattern making always is about math, and sustainability with pattern making is about zero waste. So it's a lot more complex You'll see some of that in the runway show. Science is experimentation. You're doing it all the time as a designer. You're experimenting. Natural dyeing, it's all about learning how to get the balance right between what you're trying to get, the color you're trying to achieve. So science is just naturally embedded in it.
So how can audience members, how can just the regular public make sustainability more a part of their lives through some of the things that they're hearing about tonight and learning about tonight? What can they take home and actually take action for themselves?
Hold on to your clothes longer. I think just being like from the clothing perspective, I've mentioned some of it, is just being more mindful about your purchases, kind of understanding, looking a little bit more deeply about the materials you're purchasing, about the designers you're purchasing from, investigating that a little bit more. Legislation is key. Like, there may be something happening in Massachusetts, I'm told, that might push some sustainable fashion initiatives but that becomes really important for the general population to get involved with that as well. So I think being mindful is really important.
And I would say that, especially on this panel, this isn't my profession, right? This is my joy, but it's not my profession. That's okay. You don't have to, we need to learn from the people who are doing it, but then we need to take action. And it doesn't have to be big, because small matters, small is significant. To take a moment and say, is there anything that those jeans with a hole in them can still be used for? I mean, maybe it's cutoffs, the classic, but that not everything is garbage. And even if it is, how can we dispose of our things in an appropriate way?
How can the public participate in the areas that you're interested in? I mean, they may not know anything about quilting. They may not know how to design a darn thing or, anything about food, but how can people sort of participate and be a part of that?
For my work, with trees, if you don't have a tree in front of your house or your apartment building, you can, especially here in Massachusetts, you can request, the city to plant a tree. And I saw that like in New York now, you can do that as well. So if you want to be a tree advocate and you want to have more trees in your neighborhood, you can ask now.
If you're in Boston, you can email me and visit our labs whenever you'd like. You can also join our mailing list. We do a lot of pop-up events to bring together sort of the sustainable synthetic biology, alt protein, science adjacent or early adopter community together. We did a tasting event a couple months ago and are hoping to do more in the future. So all of that you can find in our newsletter, shameless plug. But yeah, we're happy to talk or hop on a Zoom or visit in person. You can come visit in person anytime.
Okay, well, we have a lot of questions that have come in, so I'd love to turn to those now. And of course, please use the hashtag sustainable at slido.com to enter your questions. For the two of you that questions come in, are there good resources for textile recycling? Where can I find them?
That's a great question. Because actually, I don't know if everybody's aware, but Massachusetts has a law in place that you cannot throw away your textiles anymore. So it's very hard, honestly. It's been something I've been trying to figure out. It's the textile piece. And because there are places that'll take your clothes, but you also want to be careful about that too and where they're ending up. But the textiles one there are a few listed actually on the website of the Massachusetts government site for textile, I think it's called textile recycling. So there are some places on there now that you can look at, because you can't throw anything away, which is awesome at Massachusetts actually.
And if you live within the borders of the city of Boston, you just go to the city of Boston's website and they will come to your home and pick up these textiles. And there's a long list. In fact, our guild, we collect scraps and we put them on my porch and they come and get them. And they'll also take shoes and umbrellas and just all the textiles. So there's other sites out there that do this in other cities, but the city of Boston, it's free.
Okay, another question's come in. How does your work help the public challenge the idea of disposability of people, animals, materials? How does it challenge this idea that things are just simply disposable?
It's a radical idea to maybe challenge the concept of like growing an entire living, breathing creature only to like pick apart the bits and pieces that we need from its body. Like, I think that if we had the choice not to do that, we wouldn't. And that's really what cultivated meat is about. It's about taking like one biopsy from a cow and then creating some sort of like cell bank similar to the way that we have seed banks of all of these various species of animals, and then just letting them live their lives the way that we do until their natural end, instead of treating creatures as disposable foods.
So Meera, there's actually a follow-up question for you. Someone wants to know, there's been such a fervor against genetically modified organisms, GMOs. Do you anticipate these types of concerns with lab cultivated meat?
Yeah, I do anticipate those concerns, but I think when we look back to the anti-GMO sort of backlash, the core of that wasn't really an aversion to the scientific concept of genetic modification. It was really about the predatory and monopolistic practices of Monsanto. So I think there's sort of this revisionist history about it, but at its core, it started as people being like, people aren't anti-science, they're anti-Apple, and Monsanto was being a really horrible company. So I think the lesson learned is that cultivated meat companies and cell ag companies and anybody really shouldn't leverage your size and dollars to put people out of business and sue others.
Many people find the state of our planet to be quite depressing and the future to be kind of bleak. How can some of your work help sort of uplift people emotionally and make them feel more hopeful about the future?
I'll pick up on that one. In my professional life, I'm a mental health counselor, so I actually see this. People come to therapy and they're depressed about the world. And one of the things I know for sure, that when we're feeling powerless, the antidote is action. And again, small doesn't have to be insignificant. That being able to do something like recycle your clothes or your scraps of food and to reuse things in new and novel and interesting ways is actually very uplifting, and it can give you a sense of purpose. And I do think that that can counteract feelings of being overwhelmed and depressed about the state of the world.
I'll add, just in terms of teaching sustainable fashion, when I first started teaching it, I was a bit scared actually, because I didn't want to push students out of the department. I was afraid that opening this can of worms, because there's a lot to uncover, would actually be a little bit daunting, and it is. But I also know that it's one of the basic necessities of life, so we're always going to need designers, and we need to find creative solutions that are sustainable. So the joy that comes out of it, honestly, you'll see in the work tonight, I hope, because these are all students or former students who have taken this on and they're leading with their work in this way. And that, for me, is, for them, it's really, they're doing something so positive as designers, and it's just, you feel happy because you're doing work that you know is good work. And that's joyful.
Jen, there's a question I think that's directed to you. When it comes to fashion, being mindful about fabric quality or sustainability is a luxury in itself. Oftentimes it comes with a higher price tag. How can sustainability and accessibility go hand in hand when the system isn't set up for it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we talk about a lot, is that sustainability is not completely accessibility right now. And one thing, like if we even talk about organic cotton, in order for something to be made from organic cotton, usually organic cotton farmers, they yield much smaller a yield per acreage of cotton, so they have to charge higher price, which makes a lot of sense. unless there's a tipping point. I think it's 30% of all like companies out there have to be using that in order for it to level out. So we need to get more and more companies to be doing these processes, because then the price will come down. But it is a real issue, accessibility. And I think some things to consider is you can be sustainable in different ways. You can upcycle, you can thrift. But in terms of buying something new, it is also thinking about your mindset a little bit, because we tend to buy things that are less expensive, but we'll buy more of them. Because in our mind, psychologically, it's like, oh, well, it's not that expensive, but then it falls apart, and then we buy another one. So it's an investment. I think investing in quality and craftsmanship is really, and then you hold on to it longer and you buy less things, is something to consider as well.
Thank you. So speaking about inputs, so question for you, Scooby. Where do you set up your kits? Is it in mostly only city areas, forests? If you've done both, then what differences have you observed between city and forest?
Sure. I've done it in cities. The first location for Hidden Life Radio was in Cambridge. And I've done it, so last summer in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York, that was in a rural area. And then with the palm reading project, we've been to many deserts for some reason. Like the last kind of like international location, we were recording at an oasis in the West Bank. And then we recorded at another oasis on the Israeli side. And there was a big contrast between those locations. Like the oasis in the West Bank was kind of on its own. And then the oasis on the Israeli side was a botanical garden with a spa. So the music that we recorded was very different from those locations. So I've done it a lot of different places. It depends, like if I'm partnering with with like a tree advocacy group, then I'll tend to do it like where they're based. But I kind of like all the locations, if it's like in the city or remote, just kind of, I guess, sort of as like a very amateur scientist to really kind of gather the data and listen and see what the similarities are and what the differences are, like the data translated into music.
Great, thank you. Meera, questions come in for you. How long do you think it will take for lab-grown meat to become mainstream? And what about traditional farmers? Should they be compensated, phased out? What do you see as the future?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question. Everybody always asks, how long will it take? And I have a policy of not giving a number. It's going to take a long time. It'll depend on, like right now, globally, there's been $3 billion invested across academia and industry in cultivated meat, which sounds like a lot of money, but that is less than one EV factory. So it's actually like pittance. So for this to take off, we'll need a massive investment by government, and it's going to take a long time. Like there are a lot of scientific hurdles to overcome. They're probably not insurmountable, but it will take time. And so there's not going to be any sort of rapid transition that would put existing farmers out of business. Like right now, we can't grow nearly enough quantities of cultivated meat to feed all of the people on Reddit who want to try it. So it's going to take a very, very long time for it to be mainstream.
Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap things up by just asking the panel 2 questions, and you can just take it on if you feel like it. The first one is, what collaborations would you love to take on? Like what partnerships, what collaborations would you be very excited about?
I can start. I have a recurring bit about cell-cultured crunch wraps at Taco Bell. It is my strong belief that Taco Bell is at the forefront of food innovation. If you research the way in which they made the Dorito Logo Taco, they had to totally reinvent the dust spraying because it was messing up workers' lungs, and so they had to technologically innovate the assembly line for Dorito Logo Tacos. So I think that's a perfect partner for when cultivated meat is ready for fast food.
Taco Bell, are you listening? Okay, thank you. Who's next?
I don't know if there's anyone in particular, except honestly, The opportunity I've had to work with scientists has just been amazing, and I'd love to continue. I think bringing scientists more in working with artists and designers is key, actually, to what the future is going to be.
I would like to do a project with the Museum of Science.
I know.
Every time I come here with my family, I see
You're going to start pretty soon.
Well, a plant-based project. Every time I come here with my family, I see the living wall. I'm always like, what would that sound like? You know, and doing it in in like the New England area or like on the East Coast where there's true seasons. It would be great to just have one of my systems just set up year-round, so you could just listen to it like constantly, and then have that live streamed for folks at home to hear it.
We can make that happen.
Okay.
Okay. Awesome. So my last question, and please chime in. If you could inspire the audience to think or to do something, what would that be? To think or to do something. If you had that power, inspire. Go.
Maybe just challenge what is disposable and what's not. And I think we could get even very philosophical that if our jeans aren't disposable, and then maybe other things aren't disposable, and then maybe people aren't disposable, if I can go there with that, then that would be the challenge.
I would also say, take a look at where your garments are made. A lot of people don't ever look at the tags and look at not only what the material's made from. That's one thing. Polyester is really bad. It's probably the worst one. But look at where they're made. Look at who's making your garments and where they are from.
I would say if you have whatever your relationship with nature is, make it stronger. And I think the way forward in the future is really we need more trees in the world and like a stronger connection to them.
When next time you're cooking meat, if there's any sort of like thing that you wish the meat could do that it isn't currently, let us know, and we can think about how we can make that happen in the lab.
Okay. What can meat do? That's awesome. I love that. Well, folks, that's it for our panel portion. So now the party begins. And let me first thank our panelists. Thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your insights.
Thank you.